Hi, today I'm going to guide you through sewing, the basic procedure for sewing the quilted coat. So as I mentioned in the previous video, you have options about whether you're going to pre-quilt your fabric or whether you're going to buy pre-quilted fabric. Now if you buy pre-quilted fabric, then you can choose to either line it with what I'm going to call a flat lining, which would be something low profile like a cotton or a linen. And then what you'll do is baste the lining to your shell pieces and treat them as one. And you'll use the same finishes as if you had quilted the fabric yourself. What I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to show you how you would do it if you use a fluffy lining. This one has got, I'm using a Sherpa lining. So the first thing you need to do is cut out all of your pieces, or if you have pre-quilted your fabric, if you have quilted your fabric yourself, then just true up those pieces. So lay your pattern piece back on them and just trim around, make sure that they're accurately cut. So jumping off, the first thing we need to do is do our pockets. So if you are doing the flat lining or a Sherpa or fluffy lining, the procedure is going to be the same. You're going to stay stitch the lining onto the back of the pockets. In a different video, I will show you the different binding techniques for using either twill tape or bias binding. So I'm just going to run through it, just mention it. If you need help with the actual process of binding, you can look at my videos. There are also other videos, lots of videos on YouTube about that. So if you are doing the coat view, so view B, the long version, then you will bind these edges. You'll bind 1, 2, 3, and you'll leave this edge unbound. If you are doing the shorter version, the jacket or view A, then you will bind all the way around this pocket piece. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've decided to use twill tape for this one, and I'm going to bind around the whole thing. Now I'm using 1.5" wide twill tape, and I found that when I folded it in half around the pocket, the binding's a little bit too wide for my taste, so, and I didn't buy any of the inch wide stuff, so I actually, when I folded it in half, pressed it in half, I only pressed it like 3/4 of the way over, and that's just going to give me like a narrower binding. So I'm going to bind all the way around both of my pocket pieces. You need to make sure they're lined at this point, and then I will come back. Okay, so I have bound those two pockets. Now this fabric does not like to be pressed because it's nylon, but if you were using cotton or something, then I would press it, give it a really good press. Especially when you've quilted something, if you've quilted it yourself, it's really nice to chuck it in the washing machine afterwards, just to kind of meld everything together and get that nice kind of crinkly texture that you can get from with quilting. That's so lovely. So anyway, so yeah, don't worry about like giving it a good press if it's a pressable fabric. I just don't want to melt this fabric. So the next step is to put our pockets on the fronts. So I hope you can see this. I've marked the position of the pockets using pins. Now for view A, it kind of goes like in the middle here. For view B, there are notches on the side and like a couple of dots where you would line it up in the side, and then you'll stitch it into the side seam. So place it however according to whichever view you're doing. Now, because it's bound, it might end up a slightly different size from exactly where the markings are. That's not a big deal. But what I would say is because, you know, if you've made some decisions about binding, it might end up a little bit, the binding might end up a little bit wider or narrower than I have accounted for. So if you use the binding, the 1-inch binding that I specify in the instructions, you should be good. But I'm using actually slightly wider binding here. So I just want to fold that over the edge here and make sure, you know, I like the way it looks and there's going to be enough clearance for my buttons and everything. And I think it's going to be fine, but I'm just double checking that. Like if you were using a really wide binding, that could be an issue, but just wanted to put it out there. Okay. So I'm just kind of aligning the pocket with these points and I'm just going to pin it into place. Now, this would be a great time, if you are a hand baster, this would be a great time to baste this down. I'm just going to pin it in place. You can see how nice that's looking. Gee, wouldn't it'd be really satisfying if those had lined up, but they don't. I wonder if I can kind of, maybe I can fudge it a little bit so that lines up better. Let's see. These are the things that go on because the angle of the pocket wasn't exactly with the quilting. Okay, that's actually not bad. I'm fudging it a little bit here, you see, but it's actually, anyway, that was very optional. That is very optional. So, I don't know, I didn't plan this, like, I didn't line this up on purpose, like, when I cut it out, so I don't know what the other side is going to look like. We'll see. Okay, so this is, you know, obviously the pocket opening where you're going to put your hand in. What we're going to do is we're going to top stitch this down. So you've already got the line of stitching for your binding here. We're going to stitch it down along the edge here to there, leaving this free. When you start the row of stitching, I'm going to actually do like a triangle here and then go around and then a little triangle at the other end just to reinforce that so that it doesn't wear. The other thing you could do is you could do a bar tack here. It depends. I'll see when I get on the machine, I'll have a look and kind of ascertain whether or not I'm going to do a bar tack or a little triangle. If you just go around and just back tack, there's a lot of stress on that one point. You could also put rivets in, that would look kind of cute too, like jeans rivets. Actually, that would look really good. So it's up to you how you want to reinforce that pocket. You just want to make sure that you're not going to like inadvertently like rip it off. So if you, like I said, if you're a hand baster, now would be a good time to baste that on just so that when you sew it on, it's just no problems. Let's have a look at the other side. Okay. Ooh, I can kind of, looking at how I can fudge it on this one as well. I can just fudge it, I think, so that those lines match up quite well. Wow, that's a real fluke. So anyway, I'm going to pin it down. Ooh, there we go. Some of my pins are kind of blunt. I should probably replace them. Okay, so both the fronts I'm going to sew along here, making sure I'm leaving like the opening free so I can get my hand in and out. So yeah. Go ahead and do that, and I will be back. Right, so I have my pockets just check that you can get your hands in and it's comfortable and everything. Have to excuse this little wet bit here. My iron, I was like steaming, and because I didn't want to press the iron down onto this fabric, I didn't want to melt it, so I was trying to steam, and then it just like leaked some water on. Luckily, it's nylon and it doesn't really matter. Okay, so fronts are done. At this point, oh, I just wanted to show you actually on the back, you can see it more clearly how I did the little triangles at the start and end of that stitching. At this point, if you forgot or if you haven't already done it, if you're doing the flat lining, then you should make sure that you stay stitch that on now. But I'm doing the separate lining, so that's not a big deal. Okay, here's my back piece. Whoops, you can't really see it because it's so big. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the shoulder seams. So I'm going to sew the shoulder seams. It's a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the shoulders, and then I'm going to be back and I'm going to show you some options for with that seam. Okay, I don't want this to be too repetitious, but I also don't want you to have to like skip to too many videos. So I just want to show you how I'm doing the seam finish on this fabric that I'm gonna where I'm leaving the inside with that nasty batting edge. I'm top stitching it. So actually with all of the seam finishes, you're going to grate it. So in this case, I'm grating the seam allowance for the back side of the shoulder seam. The flat binding technique takes a little bit more explanation, so that will be in a different video. But at this point, you will finish these seams either using the flat binding method or this one. So I've graded that away, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this seam allowance back over and then top stitch. So I'm basically going to flip the whole thing over, make sure my seam allowances are pushed over here, and I'm going to top stitch it just a 1/4 of an inch away from that stitching line. The reason I'm doing this is because I can't press this fabric because it melts, and I want this to lie really flat. So I've done it on the other side so you can see what it looks like, and it's just like a really nice, gives it a really nice finished look to it. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'll be back to show you the sleeves. It's actually a very quick sew, this garment, apart from if you decide to quilt it yourself. Then I don't take any, then it will take you a while. Okay, I've top stitched that, and I'm going to show you how to put the sleeves on. It's pretty simple. We're gonna insert them flat. So I've marked that notch. I just marked it with chalk actually instead of snipping it, because it seemed like a better way with this fabric. I'm just gonna match this notch marking to that shoulder seam, and then I'm gonna match the sleeve to the body of the garment. Now you'll notice like I've kind of hung it over the edge a little bit, okay? And that's normal because when we flip it in, it's gonna be flush. So it's gonna extend by, if you imagine that this is your stitching line, because it's a 5/8 of an inch stitching line, I'm just gonna match that stitching line up with where it would intersect with that side edge there. And then I like to just take a middle point. If you want to put more pins in, feel free. This is very like slippery fabric, so pins are good. Same on this side, I'm just hanging it over the edge by that 5/8 of an inch so that it trues when we flip it under. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew I'm going to sew the sleeves on like this, and then I'm going to grade it as before and top stitch it as before, flipping the seam allowance towards the body of the garment. So towards the center front, I suppose, like away from the sleeve head. Then that is going to help us keep the side seams nice and flat as well. Okay, so looking pretty good here. Got my sleeves on, and on this one I've top stitched it, but you would do the flat binding if you're flat binding. Now we're going to sew the side seams. So we're just going to fold the front pieces. So this is the front piece here. I'm going to fold it back over the back. So essentially putting the coat inside out. And then I'm going to pin and sew this side seam, the sleeve and the side seam in one shot. So here we go. It's getting a bit unwieldy. Just going to match these seams here. And match the ends here. And I'm going to just put a halfway pin here. And then match the bottom edges. Okay, so I'm going to sew that in one shot. And then when you come to do the either the flat binding or the top stitching, you'll actually go from like inside here, you'll sew down here, and you'll just kind of like bunch up, you'll sew down the sleeve and you'll just like bunch it up and tunnel down in it as you go. So I'll be back once I've sewn the sleeve and side seams. Okay, it's looking pretty good, I have to say. So here it is. You know, on a cooking show, how they say, here's something I did earlier. I'm about to do that. So if you flat lined it, or if you had the, you know, self lining because you pre-quilted, you are all ready to bind. I'm using a separate lining for this that I'm going to attach now. So what I did is I constructed the lining in exactly the same way as the shell there. I did it in a Sherpa. This is it's actually technically a knit, but it's quite a stable knit, so I'm treating it as a woven. Here, I sewed it so that the like seams, so the wrong side is going to go like against the wrong side of the garment, but the thing that I did here, because this has got some thickness to it, is I just increased my seam allowances just by a smidge. And by a smidge, I mean, like I really do mean a smidge, like 1/4 of an inch. So now what I'm going to do, so you'd go ahead and do that, obviously, if you aren't doing self-lining, then ignore this. So you're going to take the sleeves and put them inside the sleeves. Ooh, I've got my like wrist pin cushion on, so it's not really the easiest. There we go. And I'm just going to pin it together, like pin the lining to the shell together just at the kind of important points, and then we'll see if we need to trim anything off. So I'm just kind of pinning it at the shoulders and at the neckline. I'm actually gonna match these shoulder seams here, match this like shoulder point, more or less, doesn't have to be exact. just so I can kind of get how it's going to hang. It's about there. And then give it a little shaky shake. You know, it's possible that the Sherpa could have stretched a little bit, or perhaps I cut it a little bit differently. So I'm just gonna like line these edges up, and you can see here, like it's just a titch too long, and I don't want to ease it in, like, and by a titch I really mean it's like a 1/4 inch too long. That's not going to be a problem. So what I'll do, isn't that going to be cozy? It's going to be so cozy. Is I'm going to stay stitch around the edge. I'm going to stay stitch around the whole edge. I'm going to essentially attach the lining to the shell, and you'll see that when it's opened, like it's all clean inside. So I'm going to do that. And then same on the sleeves, just make sure that the sleeves aren't twisted at all. Make sure everything's lying nice and flat and that you're not stretching the Sherpa. You don't want the like lining to like be shorter and for it to kind of ruck the outside up like this. So you're just gonna make sure it's like lying nice and flat. If it happens that your sleeve's a little bit on the short side, the best thing to do is actually trim back the shell just a tiny bit. To rectify that, but we'll see how we go. So I'm gonna stay stitch it together and bind it. What I am gonna do is I want to add a hanging loop. So after I stay stitch it, and I'll just pin it on now to show you. I'm gonna find the center back. So center back is there. And if I'm feeling clever now, I'll do it all in one. I cut a piece of bias. You could use a scrap of twill tape, whatever you like. And I've kind of just pressed it into this hanging loop shape. And I'm just going to like center it around the center back like that. And after I stay stitch it, I'll stay stitch this down. If you want to put a label in too, you can do that, and then you'll bind the whole thing and then you'll be done. So I hope that this sew along was helpful for you. And I'm looking forward to seeing your cozy outerwear.